I would really love to open this with that song from the 90s version that got remixed for the credits of this one, but the video would get copyright claimed immediately, and I don't like any of the other ideas I had, so let's just roll the credits. Mortal Kombat! So, I had really wanted to get this video out the same day that the thing went live on HBO Max, which was Friday, but I have had a Friday and then into a weekend of intermittent migraines and a huge work backlog, so that that didn't happen. But I still want to get my thoughts out on this. Now, as I mentioned, I am a fan of the 90s Mortal Kombat film. Not Mortal Kombat Annihilation. We do not speak of such things here. But I grew up on that film. I still like that film. I'll still watch it for fun. And I don't know how much of it is nostalgia clouding my idea of it, but to me, it's a very, very good balance of knowing precisely how ridiculous it is without playing the entire premise like it's a joke. And that is not an easy balance to get. And I think that counts for a lot, especially considering that it was a PG-13 movie of a video game that was far bloodier than the movie was allowed to be, which was weird. But now we have an R-rated Mortal Kombat, which is certainly something that fans of the franchise have been clamoring for a long dang time. So, with more time, updated effects, and allowing for the gore that made the series infamous in the first place, how did the movie turn out? Pretty good. It's a bit of a mixed bag. It's funny, I was happy with and satisfied by a lot of it, yet by the time it was over, still felt a little bit underwhelmed, and I think that had more to do with some things that it was missing. But you know what? I'm kind of going to set that aside. I'll come back to that. Broadly speaking, on most measures, this is a better film from any sort of filmmaking perspective than the 90s version was. It is better acted in many areas. The effects are way better. The fights are very well choreographed. The nods to the game are really well integrated. I'd say they're about even on that, actually. But it's good. It's solid. There are certainly some things that are more highlights than others. And it definitely opens in a way that is odd and good, but then kind of circles back around and contributes to why this doesn't quite land by the time it wraps up. So it opens with a flashback in the distant past as we watch, effectively, Sub-Zero versus Scorpion. Now, at this point, Scorpion isn't really Scorpion yet, and Sub-Zero hasn't adopted the name yet, but he's still got the ice powers, and we do definitely see the guy who's going to become Scorpion show some of the moves that he's going to be making use of later. And it's a cool fight. Plus, you know, I am an unabashed fan of Hiroyuki Sanada, who plays Scorpion in this, so, like, that's awesome. Just having him there. He just has such a great presence on screen. He's phenomenal. And like I said, it's a good action scene. Not in love with the CGI blood, because I never really care for CGI blood. That having been said, it was noted by a friend of mine who is more into the modern games, because admittedly I haven't played a Mortal Kombat game since Mortal Kombat 3, but someone who has been playing it in the more recent generations did note that the CGI blood made it feel more in keeping with the way blood effects look in the game, which was something that I hadn't considered. Whether you think that's basically a coincidence covering for CGI blood that isn't good or an actual selling point, I think there's a valid case to be made either way. I just found that perspective kind of interesting. But after that, we then jump forward to the present, and the character of Cole. I'm sorry, who? Yeah, and that's the first thing that's really weird about this. There's a couple of decisions that were made that are very strange to me about this movie. The first is that our nominal main hero is a guy who is not from the games at all. Louis Tan plays Cole Young, and I want to stress, he's not bad. He's perfectly good in the role, and Cole's not even a bad character. But given how expansive the roster of Mortal Kombat characters is, it's very strange to me that they decided to make one up instead of repurpose one. I suppose part of that might have to do with the fact that what he is doing, his role in this story, doesn't really map on cleanly to any of the existing characters. They are having him sort of discover a legacy and a power, and I suppose you could do that with Liu Kang. Liu Kang does appear, but they're not doing that with him. And if I were to guess, the main reason they're not is because that's the role Liu Kang was playing in the 90s. And it's one of the changes that I think was made largely to make this feel not like a remake of the 90s version, which I do get not wanting that feeling coming off the whole thing. But there are some decisions that were made that very much feel born out of, we want to not overlap with what the 90s version did. And sometimes it's like, yeah, but you definitely could have still repurposed that. I feel like just having it be Liu Kang and adjusting the character to be what Cole is in this story could have worked fine, but they didn't. Instead, they make up a whole new character who I kept waiting. This isn't really a spoiler because I'm basically going to tell you something that doesn't happen. I kept waiting for Cole to end up becoming, transforming, turning into, take on the mantle of a character who is from the games. I mean, ultimately, my guess was he was going to basically be the new Scorpion. But that doesn't happen, nor does any equivalent of that. He's just Cole. All right. But there's another two things that feel very much born out of a desire to not repeat the original. And I am gonna have to start to get into minor spoilers. There will be bigger spoilers later on. But again, I'm largely going to be focusing on what isn't present. And I will talk more specifically about what is there a little bit further. But I would consider this minor spoiler warning territory. So that's your initial warning there. It's very strange to me that the tournament exists, but is basically not in play. The story never takes on a tournament story structure. Because even though Mortal Kombat is a tournament, that Outworld has won 9 times, and if they win one more time, they get to take over Earthrealm. Cool, that's all the same. But here's the thing. There's new rules that only people who bear like sort of this dragon mark can enter into the tournament. Now, I don't think that's anywhere in the games, so it's either something introduced after I stopped playing, or it's a wrinkle they made up. Now, that actually works quite well, especially because one of the interesting wrinkles of that is if someone kills somebody who has that mark, it transfers on to them. So that would prevent them Earthrealm from just running out of potential champions, because if someone dies before they get to the tournament, if they were killed, well, then whoever killed them, that's the new fighter. And obviously the defeat of this person, maybe he's a better fighter anyway. So I actually kind of like that. It reminded me a little bit of Afro Samurai and the like the number 2 and the number 1 headbands. I don't have time to explain that. If you know Afro Samurai, you know what I'm talking about. But anyways, I like that as an idea. But the thing is, what the plot of this one is not one more tournament that Earthrealm must absolutely win. Instead, its Outworld is attempting to assassinate all of the viable Earthrealm champions before the tournament happens. Now, from a practical standpoint, all of the kinds of fights that would be in a tournament are still present. There's still a lot of one-on-one fights between these characters, but the structure of a tournament is absolutely absent. It's not there at all, which makes the whole thing feel a little bit disjointed, especially because we spend a chunk of the first bit dealing with effectively training for the tournament that never happens. Again, the fights that would have been in the tournament happen. I don't know, maybe I'm just too attached to that structure and that building of anticipation where we've had a fight and now, there's going to be some time in between and there's the anxiousness and the tension building to the next fight. I wanted that, and it's not here. And the other thing because I do believe that was something imposed partly to not feel like the 90s movie, because the 90s movie very much fits a tournament film structure. narratively. I think the other thing I did was basically not have Shang Tsung be the end boss. Now, he's present, and this is actually one of the few things that I will say unequivocally, the Shang Tsung from the 90s version was better. All due respect to Chin Han, Cary Hiroyuki Tagawa completely blows him out of the water as Shang Tsung. But it doesn't matter as much as you would think, because as I said, Shang Tsung is not the end boss, which is one of the things about this that makes it feel a little bit underwhelming by the end, which is that it feels like it hasn't had a proper resolution, really. Let me get some more unapologetic praise out of the way. Josh Lawson, who plays Kano, oh my god, he is amazing. He is so much fun as Kano. Performance-wise, in terms of just bringing a wonderful energy to the thing, he's terrific. Absolutely love him. Performance highlight of the movie. Nobody else is actually really bad, but nobody else gives a performance as memorable as his. Oh, that's great. Props, though, as well to Makad Brooks, who plays Jax. He looked like he was having a lot of fun, too. And I do also really want to bring some praise to the ice effects on Sub-Zero. They were really interestingly done. They looked painful to be caught in the wake of, and they were just... Actually, they kind of even looked painful for him to use. He seemed unfazed by it, but, like, you'd see the ice start to form on the tips of his fingers, and his hand looked frostbitten. It's like, ugh. Like, it was cool. It was kind of unsettling in a very cool way. But now I kind of got to get into the stuff where it kind of falls down a little bit towards the end. And it's going to be a little bit difficult to explain this, but this is your final spoiler warning. I'm going to talk about stuff that goes on at the end here. So as I said, Shang Tsung is not the end boss. Shang Tsung actually doesn't really have a proper fight with anybody. Instead, the final fight is between, well, it's a three-way fight. It is Sub-Zero versus resurrected Scorpion and Cole Young. And what's weird about this is while Sub-Zero has been a presence since the beginning and a threat since the beginning, he is not in any way orchestrating or even really the right hand of Shang Tsung in this. He doesn't feel like an appropriate final boss. The whole climax pivoting on him, it feels like a mid-boss. It doesn't even really have that feeling of, taking on, a Darth Vader knowing there's a Palpatine later on. We're not even taking on the Darth Vader. We're taking on, I don't know, Captain Phasma feels a bit more like. I don't know if I'm mixing up my Star Wars timeline to get that analogy across, and I don't even know if it works. But knowing that Sub-Zero wasn't behind anything and not rooting enough, really nobody other than Scorpion, who spends the bulk of the movie dead, has a personal beef with him. So it doesn't work as an emotional climax either. They try to have it be one for Cole because he's protecting his family, but he's protecting his family from a bunch of fighters. Sub-Zero is certainly a threat and he's taken his family, but he also fought Goro in relation to that as well. So it's not feeling personal in the way that it did for Scorpion, but because Scorpion hasn't been around, it's harder to be invested in him fighting Sub-Zero. That said, it's a good fight. It's a very cool fight. All the fights are, and some of the gore, even though I kind of complained a little bit about the CGI blood, some of the gore is like, oh, dang. Okay, and they do flat out grant some fatalities. Kung Lao has a very cool fatality. Jax has his classic, poof, which is very cool. I think ultimately the thing holding this back is the way that it sort of trips over itself, trying to distinguish itself from the 90s version. And honestly, I think the use of that song might even be the best way to sum that up, because it was a question that fans had, is that song going to be around? And eventually the makers did say, oh yes, we're using that song, don't worry. And I kept waiting for it to kick in during the movie. It doesn't. It goes over the end credits. And I think what's telling about that is I can't guarantee that this is the case, but it makes it feel very much like they didn't want to use the song. If they'd wanted to use the song, it would have been present in the film itself during its proper runtime. Putting it over the credits is basically throwing the fans a bone because they knew the fans wanted it. But if the makers had wanted it to be there, it would have been more tightly integrated into the thing itself. And that feeling that leaves me with, that feeling of we didn't want to have this thing from the 90s, is kind of permeating the whole film. Now, I don't want to say that it's a bad thing to try and distinguish your product from something that came before, especially if it's got the same dang title. But given that what most fans wanted was something not dissimilar to that film that maybe took things a little more seriously, a little less jokey, and a heck of a lot more violent, it tries to distinguish itself so much that I feel like a lot of its problems wouldn't be there if it just swallowed the fact that it's going to be structurally a bit like the 90s version. I think the film would have been more fun having the tournament structure, having Shang Tsung be more of a presence, having the fight end with him, not having Cole. Now, there's still plenty of stuff that you can do and that the film does do to distinguish it. It has other characters. It brings in Kung Lao, who was not a presence in that 90s version. What it does with Kano, completely different and wonderful and incredibly memorable. It brings in Cabal. It gives Jack something to do, which he didn't get to do until that movie that I said we don't speak of here. So, there's enough here to... People are not going to mistake it for a remake. But for some reason, they felt the need to do all this other stuff to make it feel even less like that film, which also results in a bloated runtime. This thing runs about an hour, 50 minutes, which is longer than it needs. But part of the reason it needs the extra time is to cover the ways in which the story is different. Because the original, again, had an incredibly straightforward structure. Here's the tournament, here's the stakes, get them fighting. This requires a lot more explanation. But it only requires more explanation because you rejected the simplicity of the tournament setup. So, as much as I did have fun with this movie, and will praise certain aspects of it, like the fights, like Josh Lawson as Kano, I still came away ultimately feeling like you would have been a better film if you hadn't been so worried about not looking like the 90s version. And that's just kind of where I ended up. But, what did you think about it? Have you seen Mortal Kombat? Hope so. You got through the spoiler parts. Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. If I'm very lucky, there will be a link to my Patreon up over there. I think I may have figured out how to get that working again. We'll see. There are... There's rewards at every tier, including a Patreon-specific Discord, and of course, names in the credits, as you are now currently seeing. Give it a look. It's my living. It's what keeps this whole thing going, but also no pressure. The usual stuff of like, share, subscribe helps me out as well, but don't worry about that either. Because at the end of the day, you're the council. I'm just running the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned.